It was an ordinary summer afternoon in Washington Township, Michigan, a quiet neighborhood. The kind where children rode bikes in the street and families waved each other from their driveways. Inside one of those homes was a little boy, 2-year-old Damian Sutton. With his bright eyes, playful laugh, and toddler's boundless energy, Damian was the center of his young mother Nikki's world. On this day, Nikki left her son in the care of her boyfriend, 26-year-old Ronald Dimambro. For many parents, this would have been a simple decision, a trusted arrangement. But within hours, tragedy would unfold, a tragedy that would shake not only Nikki's life, but the entire community of Macomb County. By nightfall, Damian would be rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors described what they saw as one of the worst injuries they had ever encountered in a child so young. Massive swelling in the brain, signs of severe blunt force trauma, and injuries that were impossible to mistake for a simple accident. At first, family members clung to hope. Maybe Damian had fallen from his playpen. Maybe this was all a horrible mishap. But the evidence told a darker story, one that pointed not to chance, but to deliberate violence. And at the center of it all was the man meant to be watching over him, Ronald Dimambro. To understand the depth of this tragedy, we must first understand who Damian was. Born in 2011, Damian Sutton was described by his family as a sweet, curious child, full of energy, always smiling, always moving. His mother, Nikki Sutton, was a young parent doing her best to give her son a safe and happy life. She worked hard, leaned on family support, and made sure Damian never went without love. Neighbors remember seeing him toddle across the lawn, laughing at the smallest things. He loved cars, blocks, and chasing after pets. At only 2 years old, Damian was just beginning to explore the world, a world full of possibility. But Damian's innocence would be met with horror. On August 21st, 2013, Nikki left Damian under the care of her boyfriend, Ronald Dimambro. Nikki had trusted him, but that trust would be shattered forever. When Damian was rushed to the hospital, doctors immediately knew something was terribly wrong. His tiny body showed injuries far beyond a fall. His brain was swelling, his skull badly damaged. He was placed on life support, but the prognosis was grim. One doctor would later testify that the damage was consistent with severe blunt force trauma, the kind of force that could only come from being violently shaken or struck. This was not a stumble, not a slip. This was abuse. Within hours, investigators began to question Dimambro's account of what had happened that afternoon. And very quickly, the story he gave unraveled under the weight of medical evidence. The emergency room doctors who worked on Damian were clear. This was not the result of an ordinary fall. When questioned, Ronald Dimambro told investigators that Damian had fallen out his playpen and hit his head. It was a simple story, almost too simple. But the medical team had seen enough cases of child abuse to know the difference between accident and assault. According to Dr. Bethany Moore, a child abuse pediatrician who later testified in court, Damian's injuries were consistent with violent shaking or blunt trauma, not with a minor fall. The swelling in his brain was catastrophic, and the force needed to cause such damage would have been extreme. Investigators with Washington Township Police immediately zeroed in on Dimambro. They noted inconsistencies in his timeline, the lack of external injuries matching his explanation, and, most importantly, the science, which simply didn't support his version of events. Back at the hospital, Nikki Sutton sat by her son's bedside, begging for a miracle. Machines kept Damian alive, but his tiny body was failing. Doctors prepared her for the unthinkable. Damian would not survive. Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together Dimambro's background. At just 26, he had already been described as short-tempered and volatile. Friends and neighbors said he was easily angered. And now, with a 2-year-old in his care, that temper may have boiled over. Within days, the case shifted from a medical emergency to a criminal investigation. Dimambro was arrested on suspicion of child abuse as the community waited anxiously for Damian's fate. Tragically, just 5 days later, on August 27, 2013, Damian Sutton was pronounced dead. The charge against Ronald Dimambro was now upgraded to murder. The case of State of Michigan versus Ronald Dimambro gripped Macomb County. The tragic death of 2-year-old Damian Sutton wasn't just a crime. It was a test of justice for a community shaken to its core. The prosecution, led by Assistant Prosecutor William Cataldo, made their case clear from the start. Damian's death was not an accident. It was murder. The most powerful evidence came from the doctors who had fought to save Damian's life. Dr. Bethany Moore, a pediatric child abuse specialist, explained to the jury that Damian's brain injuries were consistent with violent shaking and blunt force trauma, the kind of injuries often seen in shaken baby syndrome. This was not the result of a minor fall. A fall from a playpen could not generate the force necessary to cause this level of brain swelling. The jury listened as photos and scans of Damian's injuries were shown in court. Many in the gallery wept. Then came Nikki Sutton, Damian's mother. Her voice cracked as she described leaving her son with Dimambro, trusting him, believing her child would be safe. When she received the call that Damian was in the hospital, she rushed there, only to find her son hooked up to machines, his little body bruised, his future slipping away. She told the jury, "I just wanted to take care of my son. I never thought I was leaving him with a monster." Her testimony was emotional, raw, and unforgettable. Dimambro's defense team argued that Damian's injuries were accidental. They pointed to the possibility of an undiagnosed medical condition or an accidental fall. They painted Dimambro as a young man overwhelmed, but not malicious. But the weight of the medical evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors highlighted Dimambro's inconsistent statements. First, he said Damian fell. Later, he suggested the child was already sick. Detectives testified that Dimambro seemed evasive, more concerned about himself than the boy fighting for his life. As testimony continued, jurors couldn't look away from the truth. A toddler had suffered violent trauma, and only one man was with him when it happened. The trial built steadily towards emotional peak, each witness another piece of a devastating puzzle. And soon, the jury would face the ultimate question. Was Ronald Dimambro guilty of murder? The courtroom was silent when the jury returned after hours of deliberation. Nikki Sutton sat clutching a photo of her little boy, while supporters filled the benches, waiting for the words that would decide Ronald Dimambro's fate. The foreman stood. The judge asked the question that would define the trial. How do you find defendant Ronald Dimambro on the charge of felony murder? The answer was firm, unshaken. Guilty. Gasps filled the courtroom. Some cried in relief. Nikki wept openly, knowing that at least the truth about Damian had been recognized. At sentencing, prosecutors pressed for the harshest penalty allowed under Michigan law. Assistant Prosecutor William Cataldo argued that Damian's death was a result of violent, deliberate abuse, not an accident. When it was her turn to speak, Nikki addressed Dimambro directly. Her words were searing. "You took my baby from me. You took his future, his smile, his laughter. You broke a trust that can never be repaired." Dimambro himself showed little emotion. In fact, according to reporters in the courtroom, he seemed detached, even cold. He did not apologize. Judge Jennifer Founce looked directly at him as she delivered her sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was a maximum, and it sent a message. The life of a child, so fragile and innocent, deserved the strongest protection the justice system could give. For Nikki Sutton and her family, it was a measure of accountability, but not closure. Nothing could bring Damian back. Outside the courthouse, Nikki told reporters, "Justice was served today, but my son is still gone. That pain will never go away." The case made headlines across Michigan, highlighting once again the devastating consequences of child abuse and the need for vigilance, awareness, and protection for society's most vulnerable. But the story of Damian Sutton didn't end with the verdict. His memory would live on, a reminder how fragile life is and how far-reaching the consequences of violence can be. In the years following Ronald Dimambro's conviction, the name Damian Sutton became more than a headline. It became a call to action. Washington Township was shaken to its core. Neighbors who watched Nikki raise her son described Damian as a curious, bright-eyed little boy who loved to laugh. The tragedy sparked difficult but necessary conversations about the dangers children face when placed in the wrong hands. Vigils were held, balloons released, and memorials created in Damian's honor. At each gathering, the message was clear. Child abuse cannot be hidden, ignored, or excused. Local advocacy groups began pushing harder for reforms. More education for parents, stricter background checks for caregivers, and stronger penalties for abusers. Damian's case was cited in training sessions for social workers and law enforcement as a reminder of how subtle warning signs can escalate into tragedy. For Nikki Sutton, life would never be the same. She often spoke of her son's gentle spirit, describing how a smile could brighten even the darkest days. Though grief consumed her, she also used her voice to speak about the importance of vigilance, trusting instincts, asking questions, and never dismissing the signs of abuse. Her words resonated with parents everywhere. If something feels wrong, speak up. It might save a child's life. Though his life was heartbreakingly short, Damian's story continues to ripple outward. His face, frozen in photos of a happy toddler, serves as a haunting reminder of innocence lost, but also as a rallying cry for change. Journalists, legal experts, and child advocates still reference his case when discussing the failures and responsibilities of those who care for children. In the end, the story of Damian Sutton is not just about a crime. It is about the fragility of trust, the depth of parental love, and the duty society has to protect its youngest and most vulnerable. His legacy, though born of tragedy, carries with it hope that awareness, vigilance, and justice can prevent another child's life from being stolen too soon.